The alarm clock screamed at 4:30 a.m., but Adunni Bakare was already awake, staring at the water stain spreading across her ceiling like a map of her failures. The landlord had promised to fix the roof 3 months ago, but promises in Suralere were as fleeting as morning mist. She rolled off the thin mattress she shared with her 8-year-old daughter Kimmy, careful not to wake the child who had finally fallen asleep after crying about the holes in her school shoes. The bucket she'd placed to catch the drips was overflowing again. Adunni dressed in the dark, pulling on the same faded nurse's uniform she'd worn for the past 4 days. The laundromat fee was money she couldn't spare, so she hand-washed it every other night and prayed it would dry by morning. Today, damp patches clung to the fabric like her desperation clung to her soul. At the teaching hospital in Yaba, Adunni moved through her 12-hour shift like a ghost haunting her own life. She changed bedpans, administered medications, and held the hands of dying patients while her own world crumbled. Her supervisor, Matron Folake, had been watching her with sharp eyes lately, noting every minute she was late, every moment her exhaustion showed. Nurse Bakare, Matron Folake called during the afternoon shift change. A word. Adunni's heart hammered against her ribs as she followed the older woman into the cramped office that smelled of antiseptic and broken dreams. "Your performance has been concerning," Matron Folake said, not bothering to look up from her paperwork. 3 medication errors this month. Late to work 6 times. I'm afraid I have to issue you a formal warning. Ma, please, one more incident, and you're terminated. We can't afford mistakes in this profession. The words hit Adunni like a bus on Lagos-Ibadan Expressway. This job was her lifeline, the thread keeping her and Kimmy from joining the homeless children she saw scavenging in Computer Village every morning. After work, she rushed to Kimmy's school for the parent-teacher conference she'd almost forgotten. The private school in Acadia was modest but clean, a step up from the public schools where teachers went months without pay and students sat 3 to a desk. Adunni worked double shifts to afford the fees, but lately, even that wasn't enough. Mrs. Okafor, Kimmy's teacher, was a kind woman with patient eyes, but her message was devastating. Kimmy is brilliant, Mrs. Bakare. One of the brightest students I've taught, but she's struggling to concentrate. She's hungry in class, falls asleep during lessons, and yesterday I found her crying because the other children were teasing her about her shoes. Adunni looked down at her own hands, noting how the constant hand-washing at the hospital had cracked her knuckles until they bled. "How much do I owe for this term?" 45,000 naira. "I'm sorry, but if it's not paid by Friday, we'll have to ask Kimmy to stay home." Friday was tomorrow. The Danfo ride home felt like a funeral procession. Lagos traffic crawled past in a blur of yellow buses, Okada motorcycles, and the endless hustle of people trying to survive another day. Street hawkers pressed against the windows, selling everything from phone chargers to roasted plantain, their calls mixing with gospel music from the bus radio and the sound of Adunni's world collapsing. At home, Kimmy sat at their small table, homework spread before her, using the light from their neighbor's window because NEPA had taken the electricity again. The sight of her daughter's determined face, bent over books despite everything, broke something inside Adunni. "Mama, are you okay?" Kimmy asked, looking up with eyes too wise for her 8 years. "Yes, baby. Just tired." But she wasn't okay. That night, after Kimmy fell asleep, Adunni sat on their tiny balcony and added up the numbers again. Rent, overdue by 2 months. School fees, 45,000 naira by tomorrow. Food, she'd been stretching 1 bag of rice for 3 weeks. Hospital bills for Kimmy's asthma medication, unpaid. Her mother's diabetes medication back in Ibadan. She hadn't sent money home in 2 months. The math was simple and brutal. She was drowning. At 3 a.m., desperation drove her to open her phone and scroll through the contacts she'd avoided for months. There it was, Bo's, Lagos Island office. Her former friend from nursing school who had taken a different path, trading her white uniform for designer clothes and a job that asked no questions about the source of sudden wealth. Her fingers trembled as she typed, "I need to talk." The response came immediately. "Tomorrow. Victoria Island." "I'll send address." Friday morning arrived with the weight of Judgment Day. Adunni dropped Kimmy at school, kissing her forehead and whispering promises she wasn't sure she could keep. The ride to Victoria Island felt like crossing into another country. Here, glass towers reflected the sun, and the streets were clean enough to eat from. The contrast with Suralire was so stark it felt personal, like Lagos was mocking her poverty. Bose's office occupied the 15th floor of a gleaming building. Her former classmate looked like she'd stepped from a Nollywood movie. Expensive weave, gold jewelry that caught light like tiny suns, and shoes that cost more than Adunni's monthly salary. "Adunni, look at you, still playing Angel of Mercy," Bose said, but her smile was warm, without judgment. "Come sit. Tell me what's wrong." The story poured out like water from a broken dam. The hospital warnings, the overdue rent, Kimmy's school fees, the medication she couldn't afford. Bose listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or clicking her tongue in sympathy. "I can help," Bose said finally. "One job. Clean, simple. You go to Ghana next week, bring back a package, and your problems disappear. $50,000, American." Adunni's mouth went dry. They both knew what kind of package required that kind of money and secrecy. "Bose, I can't." "You can't what? Let your daughter's future die because you're too proud? Look at me, Adunni. Look at this office, my car downstairs, my house in Lekki. I'm not proud, but I'm free." The temptation wrapped around Adunni like a silk rope. $50,000 would solve everything. Kimmy could finish her education, maybe even go to university abroad. They could move to a decent apartment, buy a car, live like human beings instead of survivors. "Think about it," Bose said, sliding a business card across the desk. "But don't think too long. Opportunities like this don't wait." That afternoon, Adunni picked up Kimmy from school for what might be the last time. The principal was understanding but firm. No payment today meant Kimmy couldn't return Monday. Walking home, Kimmy chatted about her day, her small hand warm in Adunni's palm, trusting and innocent. "Mama, Auntie Bim said her daddy is taking her to Dubai for holiday." "Where's my daddy?" The question was a knife between Adunni's ribs. Kimmy's father had disappeared the moment he learned about the pregnancy, leaving only empty promises and a phone number that no longer worked. "Some daddies aren't ready to be daddies, baby. But we're okay, just us two, right?" "Right, Mama. We're a team." At home, Adunni stared at Bose's business card while Kimmy did homework by candlelight. The electricity had been cut completely now, and their landlord had started calling daily about the rent. 3 more days, he'd said, then they were out. The card felt heavy in her hands, like it contained all her choices and none of them good. On one side, her daughter's future, financial freedom, an end to the constant worry that kept her awake at night. On the other, the risk of prison, of leaving Kimmy orphaned, of becoming someone she'd sworn never to be. That night, she called her mother in Ibadan. The old woman's voice was weak but loving. "Adunni, how are you? How is my granddaughter?" "We're fine, Mama." The lie came automatically. "You sound tired. Are you eating well? Taking care of yourself?" "Yes, Mama. Good. Remember what I always told you. No matter how dark the night, morning always comes. Keep your head up, my daughter. You're stronger than you know." After hanging up, Adunni cried for the first time in months. Ugly, desperate sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for her mother's unshakable faith, for Kimmy's innocent trust, for the woman she used to be before life ground her down to bone and desperation. When the tears stopped, she had made her decision. The next morning, she called in sick to work and took Kimmy to her neighbor Mrs. Adebayo, a retired teacher who sometimes watched the little girl for free. "Just for a few hours," Adunni said, kissing Kimmy goodbye. "Be good. Always, Mama." The meeting was set for noon at a hotel in Ikeja. Adunni arrived early, sitting in the lobby and watching businessmen and tourists move through their lives with purpose while hers hung in the balance. When Bose arrived with a thin man in an expensive suit, Adunni stood on shaking legs. "This is Mr. Johnson," Bose said. "He'll handle the details." Mr. Johnson was all business. Flight tomorrow, return Tuesday, package pickup instructions, payment upon delivery. As he talked, Adunni saw her future splitting into 2 paths, one leading to prison or worse, the other to watching her daughter's dreams die from poverty. "I need a moment," she said. In the hotel bathroom, she stared at her reflection. The woman looking back was hollow-eyed and desperate, nothing like the optimistic nursing student who had graduated 5 years ago believing she could heal the world. But behind the exhaustion, something else flickered, a spark of the faith her mother had tried to instill in her. She thought of Kimmy, probably helping Mrs. Adebayo with her garden right now, chattering about her dreams of becoming a doctor. She thought of the patients at the hospital who squeezed her hand and called her Angel. She thought of her mother's voice. Morning always comes. When she returned to the lobby, Bose and Mr. Johnson were waiting expectantly. "I can't," Adunni said quietly. "I'm sorry, but I can't." Bose's face fell. "Adunni, don't be foolish. This is your chance." "No, this is my test." She walked away before they could argue, before her resolve could weaken. Outside, Lagos assaulted her senses. Car horns, generator fumes, the shouts of hawkers, and the eternal hustle of survival. But for the first time in months, she could breathe. At the teaching hospital, she found Matron Folake in her office and knocked on the open door. "Nurse Bakare, you're supposed to be on sick leave. Ma, I need to speak with you about my situation." For the next hour, Adunni laid bare her struggles, the overdue rent, Kimmy's school fees, the pressure that had been affecting her work. She expected dismissal, maybe even ridicule. Instead, Matron Folake listened with growing concern. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" the older woman asked. "We have programs for staff in financial distress. Emergency loans, housing assistance. Did you think you were the only nurse in Lagos struggling to survive?" What followed was like watching sunrise after the longest night of her life. The hospital had an emergency fund for staff facing eviction. The nurses' union could help with Kimmy's school fees through their education support program. There were extra shifts available in the private wing that paid overtime rates. "It won't be easy," Matron Folake warned. "You'll be working nearly 16 hours a day for the next few months. But if you're willing, we can help you get back on your feet." "I'm willing. I'll do whatever it takes." By evening, Adunni had a payment plan for the rent, a loan application for Kimmy's school fees, and a schedule that would have her working 6 days a week for the next 3 months. It was exhausting just looking at it, but it was honest work, and it was hers. She picked up Kimmy from Mrs. Adebayo's house, just as the evening call to prayer echoed across Surulere. The little girl ran to her with the boundless energy of childhood, chattering about the flowers she'd helped plant and the stories Mrs. Adebayo had told her. "Mama, you look different," Kimmy said, studying her face. "Happy different." "I am happy, baby. We're going to be okay. We were always going to be okay. We're a team, remember?" That night, as they shared a simple meal of rice and stew under the light of a recharged lantern, Adunni watched her daughter talk about her day and felt something she'd almost forgotten: hope. It wasn't the desperate hope of a drowning woman reaching for any lifeline, but the steady hope of someone who had chosen to swim rather than sink. The road ahead was still difficult. The next months would test every ounce of strength she had. But she would walk it with her head held high, her hands clean, and her daughter's trust intact. In a city where millions struggled just to survive each day, perhaps that was victory enough. Outside their window, Lagos never slept. The generators hummed, night traders called their wares, and somewhere in the distance, another woman was probably facing her own last straw. But morning always came, and sometimes, just sometimes, it brought the strength to choose the harder right over the easier wrong. Adunni Bakare was going to be just fine.